Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time you're tuning in the program called What's Going On FlintTalkRadio.com. I'm George Moss, the host of the program, and we're going to have a special guest this afternoon whom we're going to call very shortly, and that special guest is Mr. Scott Boman, who will be running for the senatorial position here in the state of Michigan. Be challenging Ms. Debbie Stabenow, who is now the senatorial representative in Washington. So we'll be calling him in a few minutes and hopefully being able to make contact. We have another person that is in the engineering, that is in the studio that's doing the engineering for us this afternoon. That's Mr. Chris. We want to thank you for coming in. John is normally here, but John had I think he had a cold or something. He had to go to the doctor, take a shot or something like that. So he's not here, but the FlintTalksRadio.com goes on anyway, and we have other technicians that can step in and do as well as what is normally done here in the excellence of the studio productions. Chris, why don't we take time right now to dial Mr. Bowman and see if he's on standby and we can get in contact with him at this point.
Hello.
Mr. Bowman?
Yes, it is.
Okay, this is George Moss calling at FlintTalkRadio.com. Want to thank you for agreeing to be our special guest this afternoon by telephone, and we are glad to have you to ask you some questions about your candidacy. We're very excited about having you as our guest, and we want to appreciate you for committing your time to us at this point.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be on your show.
Okay, Mr. Bowman, you're running for the, as I understand it, you're running for the Senate seat that is now held by Ms. Stabenow. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Some of us are familiar with you from a distance, and I'm sure a lot of the persons are aware of your campaigns in the past. Why don't you tell us something about your background and just share with us what made you decide to throw your hat in the ring?
Okay, well, I've been involved in politics for a number of years, actually, since probably all my life, but specifically in Libertarian politics since the late 80s, and my previous runs for office have all been either nonpartisan, or such as in Detroit local office, or have been through the Libertarian Party. My most recent involvement, though, has been with the Republican Party, and I've been twice elected to precinct delegate in my district, in the 13th district, and also have now decided to run for U.S. Senate as a Republican. In 2008, I ran as a Libertarian, did better than other third-party candidates, but still was pretty much ignored and received very little attention when compared to the major party candidates. And so I've tried pursuing a different course this time around, pursuing it from the perspective of trying to really get my, not just my ideas, but libertarian, free market, individual personal freedom ideas out there to the public at large, and working this time through a candidacy in the Republican Party. Right now there's a lot of different Tea Party groups having candidate forums for people who are going to run in the Republican primary, and whereas a Libertarian nomination would really only bring me into forums that would occur regarding the general election. So I believe I'll be able to accomplish more as far as having a voice in the public discourse taking this route, and furthermore, if balloted, my chances of winning would be much better with a major party than a minor party.
Yeah, I was wondering about that when I read your bio about running. I know you're a Libertarian, and I was just wondering about what chance you would have running outside of the two-party system, since the history is that there's been only one third-party candidate on the national level that ran as a third party and was able to get more votes than one of the two candidates in the major parties, and that was Theodore Roosevelt in 1912, running on the Bull Moose Party. So I don't think there's been any candidate running the third party that has actually been able to really compete with the two-party system that was so locked into it. So as I understand what you just said a few minutes
There
ago.
actually was much far long before that. There was a guy named Abraham Lincoln. Because the Republican Party essentially developed not too much before that time.
Right,
And
1854.
Pulled it from third partyhood to second partyhood.
Right.
At that point.
Yeah, okay. That's a good point. That party was set up in 1854. I think in Jackson was where it was in fact founded, right here in Michigan. And then 6 years later, we have a president from that party. So you're running in the Republican Party this time. Do you know how many candidates are going to be running in the Republican Party for the office?
Right, 5 of us.
5.
And given surprises such as people like Pete Hoekstra saying, "Oh, he's definitely not going to run. He's dropping out and then hopping back in again," I'd say almost anything's possible at this point. But I mean, I know of. Let me count that out. I believe it's 5. Let's see. We got myself. We have Randy Heckman, Peter Konieczny, Gary Glenn, Clark Durant. I don't think I left anyone out.
Okay.
Yeah, so
What now? Are you encouraged by some of the things you see going on in other campaigns where those who were, I'm looking, for example, in New York, where you had in the 9th District, that seat was in the hands of the Democratic Party since 1922, 1923, and President Obama carried that seat by 11 percentage points in 2008, had 55% of the vote. And yet the person that won that office, Mr. Turner, I think Bob Turner, won that seat handily. And the same thing happened in Nevada, another upset that occurred. Are you energized and excited about the possibilities under these kinds of political circumstances where voters are looking for an alternative, and there's obviously a lot of dissatisfaction in the electorate? What is your read about the mood of the electorate at this point toward those who are incumbents, as Ms. Stabenow would be?
Okay, well, the interesting thing here is when it goes into upsets between what traditional Republican and Democratic candidates, one problem that I've seen, it's somewhat encouraging in the sense that people are satisfied, but whether or not that transfers over into any real change is another matter. Because, and I bring this up frequently, I've been around a few years, and what I've seen is people will be critical of the major party that's in power based upon the unfortunate consequences of their policies or the direct practice of those policies, and will vote for the opposition expecting something different. One recent example I'll point to is not too long ago, people were ready to sound the funeral, tunes or reverie for the Republican Party because of the resounding upsets and this big wave of Democratic victories. Now, a lot of that was motivated by a couple things. One was unhappiness with our long involvement in the Middle East, such as the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Another part of that was people being upset about the loss of their privacy through telecommunication surveillance. And another was the fact that we had this kind of esoteric notion of people who were neither prisoners of war nor were they criminals being held in Guantanamo Bay in some kind of hybrid category that allowed for them to be effectively tortured. All of this got people very angry. All of this drove people to oppose Bush. Prior to Obama's victory in 2008, we had this surge of congressional Democrats winning, and in 2006. And back then, I had predicted, and it's published, you can look it up, that the war was not going to end in Iraq, even though that was a big objective of this, that they were basically just campaigning on a false promise. And since then, I've been borne out correct. In fact, there's still troops in Iraq. We still have a huge presence in Iraq, which has been, downplayed and downgraded somewhat. The war in Afghanistan is still going full tilt. And the easiest thing to have done of all these promises that Obama made back in 2008 when he went in would be closing the prison in Guantanamo and having these people either positioned as either being POWs or criminals, depending on the context. Not even that promise was kept. He gave an order to close Guantanamo, which he then basically did not follow through on. And as far as the telecommunication privacy, there's really no indication that any of this surveillance has been discontinued, that the huge security apparatus that remains essentially hidden, that the budget is secret, so we don't know what's being spent on that. Obama promised to make that transparent. It never happened. And so what does this have to do with your question about the Republican victories? Well, once again, people are angry. Some people are angry about the same things. I think a lot more people are angry that the economy has remained in the abysmal condition it's been in since the end of the Bush years, and it has not gotten better, in some respects gotten worse.
Mm-hmm.
I think that probably the economy now is driving things more than anything else. But even back then, the economy was an issue. That people are expecting something different, but are they going to get different policies? I'm not sure. I don't really know about those particular Republicans that win. I would hope that they're more of the Ron Paul, Rand Paul, Justin Amash type of Republicans who are for really shrinking the size of government, or, like the Gary Johnson type of Republicans. But I don't know. They may just be for big spending and big handouts like my opponent Pete Hoekstra is, that essentially are just going to give us more of the same problems by more of the same policies.
Yeah, you were talking about the dissatisfaction with Bush, and I remember when Obama was elected in 2008, James Corville made the comment that the Democrats are now reign supreme for the next 50 years. How quickly that picture was changed. But the party in power is a party we have to deal with, and it's not so much that the grass is always greener on the other side as the fact that you have to deal with the cards you've been dealt with, and the party in power is the one we have to hold accountable for the direction the country is in fact going in. How do you think that you are a libertarian, and I was really I have to tell you that I consider myself to be more libertarian than I am identified with either of the two major parties. You have run on the Libertarian ticket before. Did you run a Libertarian party ticket in 2010?
Yes, I did. For Secretary of State, and I made as a core issue Real ID. Also, at the same time, as a Republican precinct delegate, I did support the current Secretary of State candidate, Ruth Johnson. I wasn't really confident that she would follow through on really protecting individual privacy as regards to the entire ID system and keeping out of a national ID system. I'm hoping that we can count on her to do that. It still really, remains open. It's all based upon the proof of the pudding is in the eating and how things work out as she remains in office. So far, I've had some people complain that there was some personal information that was being requested that they didn't think was appropriate. But I think she's probably doing better than any of her opponents, other than myself, of course, would have done had they been elected. So I think I'm more happy with her practices in office and she got elected then.
Yeah, I read that in your bio. I'm not familiar with the national ID system proposal. What is that proposal pretending to achieve? What are the particulars here?
Okay, well, there was a law a while back called the Real ID Act. And what happened, and the objective was to essentially segue state ID licenses into becoming de facto national ID cards, where they would still have the name of your state listed on them. And it would still, like a Michigan driver's license, would still say Michigan driver's license. But it would have a variety of features that would be defined by the federal government. And in addition to that, would include the common enrollment of that information in a federal database. And actually, the database aspect of it is more significant than the instrument itself. Though there are problems with some of the designs of these enhanced IDs, such as the RFID chip, which could be tracked or remotely read, and then also high resolution photography could be used to more easily basically identify people through other pictures other than when they're being actually participating in something that requires identification, such as driving or cashing a check, for instance. That there were these other items that would go into a database that would allow for monitoring people outside of their intergovernmental interactions, but basically be more easily able to track their private behavior. And that's what was regarded as intrusive. And a number of states found it so intrusive that they basically said, no, we're not going to participate in the system. Now, since then, there have been revivals, the same idea under a different name. There's something called the PASS Act, which effectively is that. The latest scheme is E-Verify, which essentially still builds a national database in the process of people getting their state IDs. And so, in general, I have a couple problems with that, and one is strictly the privacy issue, that I feel a government that has enough information about people to monitor their whereabouts and what they're doing can abuse that information. Mm-hmm. Furthermore, not just the government, but other people not in the government now have a more easy way to rip off people's identity information if they only have to go to one well for all that data. So it creates a one-stop shop for identity thieves. And finally, there's just basically the whole 10th Amendment matter from a constitutionalist perspective, where the federal government has really exceeded its constitutional authority by probing into
you can say that again.
People's private lives through a state function.
Yeah, why does the government need all this information on us? We have, when we're born now, we get a Social Security card. When I was in college, I turned 18. I think it was 21 when I had to go to work. I got my Social Security card. Now, when you're born, you're born. You get a Social Security card at birth. So why does the government need all this information on the citizen? I've never quite understood what is the intent of collecting all this information. An ID card is more identifying citizens, where you are, who you are. What do you think that is about?
Well, first of all, I don't think the government does need that information. If the government were to stick to its prescribed duties, and just strictly speaking from a constitutional perspective, and let me clarify this, there's a constitutionalism and there's libertarianism.
Okay.
And the two ideas are frequently compatible, but there are two different things going here. The constitutionalist perspective is simply saying that people should abide by the law that makes their office exist to begin with. U.S. Senator only exists as something defined in the Constitution in specific duties and manner of election defined, which has been changed over time, but that all is in the Constitution. To exceed the Constitution, do something other than that, is essentially to nullify the very document that gives you an office to begin with. So in some respect, being a constitutionalist should be ideologically neutral. It shouldn't even matter if one really believes in socialism or libertarianism or conservatism or liberalism,
or belong in either one of the two parties.
Because basically it's just simply complying with, as long as one believes in the rule of law at all. Libertarianism, of course, is minimizing, is a belief in specifically minimizing the role of government, period, whether or not it's constitutionally allowed. That all because the government can do it doesn't mean it should, in other words.
Well, I want to ask you about that. I think that the Constitution requires limited government, so I don't see any contradiction between libertarianism in the sense you want limited government, when the fact is that the Constitution requires a limited government. It specifies in Article 1, Section 8 what the government can do, and beyond that point, given the separation of powers, given the federal system, there are those restraints. So, do you see any contradiction between constitutionalism and libertarianism? It seems to me to be very compatible.
It's not an outright contradiction. What I'm saying is, for instance, Let's say okay, here's an example. The law does not require me to go out of my way to rescue someone who's in danger.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean I shouldn't go out of my way to rescue someone who's in danger.
Okay.
I don't believe in a law that would force people to go out of their way to rescue someone who's in danger. So there's the should and the cans. As far as state law, for instance, goes, federal law actually gives the states a lot of latitude in the kind of government they can have. And while the federal Constitution, they may not enjoin a state from, for instance, having, for instance, socialized medicine for its people, that doesn't mean they should. And so it's not a contradiction so much as libertarians go beyond simply saying that the government, we should not exceed the authority that the Constitution provides us. But that's simply a rule of law matter, but also even within the Constitution. In other words, it's not that we're against anything in the Constitution, but it's like beyond that, we should also minimize it. In other words, we shouldn't just do something because the government lets us do it, or I mean that the Constitution lets a government official do it. But we should also look at what should be done, and it's going to be a lot even less than is permitted.
That's a very interesting distinction.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, I was saying that's a very interesting distinction that you made. Are you hearing me now? In terms of
Yeah.
okay, I think that's a very interesting distinction. I come from Ayn Rand's point of view as to how I see government, and I do not see the role of citizens as being one in which they should be sacrificial. And I think that's consistent with the restraints of government, which wants to make us charitable against our will through its tax policy, for example, where it wants to take the money from one segment of the population who earned it and give it to another segment of the population to which it does not belong. And I think that is a role that government is not supposed to assume, certainly not by the mandates in the Constitution. So would that be a libertarian view, the idea that we should not be sacrificial toward our fellow citizens? At the same time, you should not say that you can't voluntarily be charitable, but is government's role to make us charitable through this kind of
well, I kind of got a yes and no to that different question. To specifically address what you first said there, many libertarians, philosophical libertarians, now I'm saying with a small L, not necessarily the Libertarian Party, but they could be Republicans or they could even be in some other party. But many philosophical libertarians really got there, myself included, through objectivism, through Ayn Rand. And even though Ayn Rand herself did not really like the libertarians because they didn't have the philosophical rigor that she demanded as basically the founder of objectivism. Most of us agree with, almost all of Ayn Rand's philosophy, if not all of it, and definitely oppose the notion that anybody should be forced to live their life for another, and that people should be able to live their life for their own sake. And so in that respect, really, my views, which could also be defined as laissez-faire capitalism, are really rooted not so much in efficiency or pragmatism or economic necessity, though all of those are well served by it, but really the core motivation is a moral one, a belief that fundamentally everyone has a right to live for their own sake, and that it's wrong to use any form of coercion, be it a violence or a threat of violence, to make people do otherwise. And effectively, the only acceptable use of force is in response to force as is necessary to repel it.
Let me get the viewers to understand this in very simple terms. Do you see the Constitution as a libertarian document in terms of the basic premises of the Constitution, which interface with what libertarianism? I mean, I don't see. I'm not getting the gap between that which is required by the Constitution, restraints placed on government, and the Libertarian view, as I understand it, which is to say the government ought to be limited and should not be intrusive in ways in which it defies individual liberty. So what am I missing here? I guess I'm asking.
Okay, well, again, it's not that there is an outright contradiction. I don't think the Constitution contradicts libertarianism. What I'm saying is the Constitution, because it essentially is defining the role of the federal government, has very few limits on the state government, which is fine because I do believe that the larger the jurisdiction of a government is, the weaker the voice of the individual is within that institution. So for practical institutional reasons, that makes sense. But however, the federal Constitution, for instance, would not prevent a state from having socialized medicine. It would not prevent a state from having taxation. It does not, involuntary taxation as opposed to fees connected with contracts and so forth. There's a lot of it does not prevent the state from having government-run roads rather than private ones. So as far as a pure libertarian perspective, there's a separate battle that would be involved at the state level as opposed to the federal level. Now, of course, that's all pie in the sky at this point because we've gone so far in the other direction, where you essentially have everything being federalized and the federal government having its fingers everywhere, that simply retreating things back to the state level where the states could essentially get away with much of what the Fed's doing now, but the federal government being much smaller would be a step in the right direction, just because it would then be something more manageable for people to address rather than this huge Leviathan that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
That's the distinction I'm making.
I see. This is the point I think that was being made in the debate when Romney was being asked about Romneycare and how does that differ from what you have on the national level with Obamacare. And he was stating that the states have the prerogative of mandating things for its own needs within that boundary of the state, wherein the federal government has no right to, in fact, make an intrusion and impose it upon the states, as what happens with the kinds of things you have on the national level. So that's a good point that you made about how you're not necessarily out of the woods just because you push back and roll back some of the powers of the federal government. Let me ask you this question. You're running for the senatorial position, and what do you see as what you would do differently? Maybe a couple of areas that you have a concern about, that if you are elected to the senatorial position, that you would do differently than what you see being done right now on the national landscape.
Okay, well, one thing, it's a big one, huge one, spending. And what I see right now is a government that is, and of course the other Republicans, I'm so used to that after all these years running in another party, referring to
big party,
second or third person, but other
big spending
Republicans,
party number
my
two.
fellow Republicans, many of them still don't grasp. They talk about cutting spending, but they're still eager to spend lots of more money than is coming in, except it's money on their constituent base rather than money on the Democrats' constituent base. And we need to really be talking about cutting spending, period, across the board. This includes the military budget. And I'm for a strong national defense, but what we're doing right now isn't making us any safer. We're spreading ourselves out way too thin around the world. And it's making a poor country is not going to be a secure one in the long run. And then they got all their other, their corporate welfare. We got a case where, ironically, point out the absurdity of it, where back when they had the big bailout, essentially enough money being given to Wall Street billionaires that if they wanted to instead, they could have sent a $100 bill to every man, woman, and child on the planet Earth. A bailout that big. Pete Hoekstra, the Republican, voted against that. And voted for that. I voted to give that money over to these people. And Stabenow voted against it. So it's like, as far as Republican rhetoric, Republican action, I want to see Republicans who, if they stick to the rhetoric, I think we'll be moving very in the right direction. And I'm going to be there to keep them honest in these debates. And if if it becomes clear that they're not going to really keep to their generalities when it comes down to specifics, then perhaps I'll be taking the votes instead of them.
Yeah, I was really offended by some of the persons that were elected on the Tea Party energies of the Tea Party, and got in there the idea we're going to stop all this spending, we're going to make government live within its means, and they got up there and started voting for this 2.4 trillion dollar deficit increase, and it was just amazing how they tried to justify that change in their posture, that they were saying one thing when they ran for office, and when they got there, they did something very different. It's very, very disconcerting to see that. What do you think happens? You're saying a lot of good things as a candidate. What do you think happens when people get into office and those things they campaign on become passé? They don't actually go and follow through on it.
I think many of the people running really just are saying it to get elected. They're looking to this as a way to get a job effectively, rather than looking at it as a way to achieve the ideas that they wanted to put in effect. You also, on the other hand, have the true believers who get elected and then think that somehow they have to compromise in order to get some of what they want. But it's a very treacherous landscape, because then what one may end up doing is taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps backwards and all these give and takes. My policy, as far as what I would agree to support or not support, would be, if a bill's net direction, I mean, I don't expect anything to be absolutely going right where I want it, but if a bill's general direction is for the reduction of government, that I would support that, even if it doesn't go all the way. But if it involves taking away some liberties that currently exist in order to free up other ones, no, I'm not going to make that trade-off. Because, what I ultimately see happening is, when we see the pendulum politically swinging from left to right, back and forth, and you have all these trade-offs, I think it does swing left to right, but each time that pendulum gets a little lower and cuts deeper into the heart of liberty.
Mm-hmm. We're talking to Mr. Scott Boman, who is a candidate for the senatorial position held now by Miss Debbie Stabenow, and he's going to be running on the Republican ticket for that office. If you had been in Washington when they voted on the to raise the debt ceiling, how would you have voted on that? On that increase in the debt, you would have voted no?
Absolutely not. And in fact, I even was getting stuff from people who initially seemed like they're against the debt ceiling increase, but then them say no to the debt ceiling in big letters, increase, and then in smaller print, unless.
Yeah, unless we.
No unless.
Yeah, unless.
To me, there would be no raise. We will not raise it unless. I would simply refuse.
Yeah, I see that. I see that super committee they set up of 6 persons in one party and 6 in another, and they're going to sit down in a super committee and then come back with a proposal on how we're going to do this deficit reduction. I see that as political cover for those persons that voted to raise the debt ceiling. I would have, as you stated, would have demanded that we hold the line and get government to live within its means, starting right now.
Yes, absolutely. It's like that whole super committee thing is a politics at its worst.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the kind of thing that really just makes people who are really paying attention sick, because what we have here is essentially an evasion of responsibility. Now people can say, in fact, it reminds me of like a South Park episode where it's like the purpose of democracy is to say we're for one thing and do something else. Well, apparently that's what the purpose of the super committee is here, because it's like that way. Oh, well, we didn't get a vote on that. It didn't come up to our vote. They have all these little rules in the legislature which are designed to effectively give people political cover, so that most of the time, I mean, for one of the more outrageous examples was back when there was a movement afoot to audit the Federal Reserve, and there were way more than enough co-sponsors in the House of Representatives to actually have that audit go through. And what ended up happening was there was some other procedural vote that first attached it to a bill and then by some rearrangement allowed for some amendments to be made and a reapproval of the bill, where effectively one did not need to vote against auditing the Fed to have the result of killing the bill.
I don't know if I would be one of those persons that advocate having to order the Fed or just simply abolishing it. I think it's lost its direction from what was intended when Andrew Mellon was the. I think that was the only time it was really a responsible entity, which was doing what it was in fact set up to do, which was to stop these upheavals in the economy and try to maintain some normalcy inside of the economic order. It's long after abandoning that that restraint that it was working within during that time period. So I'm not so sure I would be satisfied with just monitoring. I think we need to talk about this abolishment, is abolishment.
Well, me too. But I mean, a first step.
A first step.
You first need to figure out where where all that money went and so forth. There needs to be some serious accountability, and then I definitely believe in repealing the Federal Reserve Act.
Okay.
And essentially, my attitude is that we should move to a system of free market money, where people may decide upon their own mediums of exchange, and the government's role would be simply to promote honesty, to make sure that if you say this note represents X value of gold or silver, that it really does.
Yes, honesty is something that I see so rarely being demonstrated by national politicians. It's just amazing how little honesty we have in our government, and the polls indicate that the American people are not buying it anymore. I think the latest poll showed that 10% of the people have any confidence in the congressional leaders. Well, have you run for national office before? I know you run on the state level, and my bio said that you have run in every election since what, 1996? Am I correct?
Since 90.
Since 90.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which year it was.
Yeah,
I think it's since 94.
Since 94.
Double check that.
Okay, so you don't get discouraged. You have yet to win office, but they say here in the bio that you have gotten more votes as a Libertarian in the state than anyone else has ever gotten. So your name is becoming more and more recognized, and the things you stand for as a candidate is getting more and more notoriety. That is of the positive kind.
I believe it was when I ran for State Board of Ed. I had actually broken some records. I have run for federal office before, and like I said, in 2008 was when I ran for U.S. Senate, and back then I was campaigning largely against the politicians who had supported the Wall Street bailout, and Carl Levin had supported that. I made that a big issue, as well as the other issues that I have the same views on. While I'm running in a different party does not mean
that you change your views.
Changed my views.
I see.
And I don't have a reason to. Everything that's happened since then has only support my views. That the economic policies I didn't think would work have not worked, and essentially that we still have politicians in here who somehow think that creating more debt, spending more money than you take in, is somehow a stimulus to the economy, where all around us we see nothing but destruction.
Are these people in Washington, are we dealing with idiots? I just can't understand what they're doing with these ridiculous economic policies. It's either got to be there's some lack of information about what economics portends. It seems to me they're clueless on the one hand. That's maybe one possible explanation. Or there's some other things that not on the surface that we don't see. I wouldn't want to believe that they're doing anything intentional to, in fact, undermine the integrity of the nation. So I have to think that they're clueless. Looking at a clueless Washington that just does not understand economics 101, or how do you see what they're doing? How would you explain the things they're doing in Washington at this point as far as their policies?
I think it's a mixed bag. You got to have some people in there that actually know what they're doing, and a person doesn't get to a position like that in power without either one being very smart, in which case they really do know what they're doing, or two, being somewhat ignorant but being a good mouthpiece and having people who are very smart and know what they're doing backing them up, in which case the people backing them up know what's going on. So just from a rational perspective of how does one actually get elected, I mean, you need either to have smart people backing you or you have to be smart yourself, usually both. And so that does leave open as the prospect of malevolence, or at least a lack of concern as to whether or not one is really doing the damage. There is a strong motivation, and Milton Friedman wrote about this somewhat when prior to getting a Nobel Prize, that there is a natural incentive to increase debt, in the sense that you get votes for giving people things, for handouts, especially when you have special constituent groups that are going to donate to your campaigns. And you, on the other hand, get people upset and lose votes by taxing them. So this is a way of essentially living the contradiction and creating debt because people don't directly see the debt. They
pass on to your grandchildren.
They see what's actually subtracted from the check.
You have
when they get a handout, they see the dollars that they're getting handed, but they don't see the overall more subtle damage that's being done across the board as the currency is debased. You
have really hit the nail on the head, right in the center of the nail, in terms of that dichotomy. On the one hand, people want the perks, and politicians are willing to give it to them by their vote. At the same time, the taxes that would be necessary to pay for these perks, that's something that politicians try to skirt away from, because that's what voters don't want. They want the entitlements, but they don't want the money coming out of their pocket to pay for those entitlements. And so that dichotomy is, I think, what has gotten us to the point where we're going to have a $16 trillion debt by the end of the president's first term. So I think that you've hit that on nail on the head. Let me ask. And also I read Ron Paul's comment in Time magazine about maybe 3 or 4 months ago, when he said that Congress is made up of power mongers and demagogues. And so the question comes down to, who are these people that are in the halls of Congress, for example, and who are these elected officials that we have in the executive branch? These cabinet members, these czars we now have. Well, I don't know where that came from. There's no constitutional mandate for it. But it raised a question, Mr. Boman. Who are these people? Do you see them? You talk about the people behind them that are smart and so on. Are these people in Washington puppets? Or, I mean, what are we looking at here in your estimation?
Like I said, I think it's really a mixed bag. I think there's people who are sincere, who start out right, but then they get handlers to back them up, help them get elected. There's trade-offs. I mean, speaking of trade-offs, here's one example of a trade-off. We have a Ron Paul Republican, basically, in the form of Congressman Justin Amash, who, to a large extent, I have a lot of respect for, who he's held strong on a lot of small government issues.
Yes.
So I don't want to be too harsh on him. But then you got the practicality of that kind of taints things, which is, in order to get himself elected to Congress, he needed support of some mainstream Republicans. And one of the endorsements he got was from Pete Hoekstra. And I didn't really even remember this at all until I received an email from Pete Hoekstra extolling that he had gotten an endorsement from Justin Amash. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I went and did a little research, which took about all of 10 minutes, and found out, thanks to the internet, and found out, but he endorsed Amash way back, when Amash was running for office. So, there's the rest.
So scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
That, you got these trade-offs going on. Even among people who are otherwise fairly principled people, they're willing to do some trade-offs for those endorsements.
I do understand the need, the give and take aspect to it. But I look at it sometimes. I say, well, this is not about the give and take. This is almost about compromising whole principles in order to do that which is political. And many times what we need on the table is a statesmanship aspect to the political office, and we seldom get it. Let's talk about Ron Paul. I know you're a supporter of Ron Paul. I've been watching those debates, and they have one coming up in Florida Thursday. I think it's going to be held in Florida, and I think that Ron Paul has been steady in his defense of his positions, and has been the one who's been most clear in his analysis of what needs to go on in this country that really would fix the problem. It seems to me the narrative of the media, though, is that Ron Paul is some kind of kook, and they're painting that narrative quite different. It's almost like them saying, do you believe the media or do you believe your lying eyes? And so they're telling us that Ron Paul is this candidate who is peripheral and all of that. And when I see the audience, the response of the audience, I see them really widely and roundly agreeing with Paul's positions. Do you think the media, the media is trying to paint Paul as some kind of flake out there, some kind of kook that we need to be worried?
Kind of, and sometimes we use the initials MSN, mainstream media, to clarify it. For instance, you are the media right now. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different people that have different views around the country. I will say, however, that when you get up to the national media level, especially networks like ABC, NBC, CBS, you get a larger proportion of people who are actually, and this is kind of going to sound a little kookish, and I'm sorry if it does, but you can look it up. Even, for instance, I heard, just to kind of, as one example, what's his name? William, I'm trying to remember his name. One of the national anchors, I'm having a mental block here.
Brian Williams?
Brian Williams, yeah. He was on Letterman, and he was speaking sarcastically about, almost as like inferring, without saying it directly, people are kooks who talk about the Council on Foreign Relations or something like that. Well, just on a lark, I decided I'm gonna key in Brian Williams and Council on Foreign Relations. Believe it or not, right on the Council of Foreign Relations homepage is a video featuring Brian Williams and Angelina Jolie talking about the virtues of the Council on Foreign Relations. And so, there you go. It's kind of like it's in plain sight, but through innuendo, it isn't. And so when you get these talking heads on the national media, essentially constantly referring back to every candidate other than Ron Paul, regardless, even the ones that were far less popular, continuously bringing up, for instance, even Michelle Bachmann's Iowa straw poll victory, and leaving out the fact that Ron Paul was just like a percentage point behind her. I don't know if that's the exact amount, but not much behind her. Mm-hmm. It becomes clear that there really is, at least among some people, a bit of a conspiracy, to use a common phrase here. That people get in the same club with a common agenda, a globalist, Fabian kind of global socialist agenda, are essentially acting as opinion makers for the rest of the country. And as long as people, and it's not just their fault, it's not like they really have direct control of all of us in some spooky way, other than the fact that people just absorb it like sponges. And if people just thought for themselves, instead of letting talking heads on national media make up their minds for them, then effectively these people become powerless. But the power is really in people's willingness to just accept them.
I think that you're exactly right, and I'm thinking also about this book I just got through reading. It's written by Larry Swaycart, called "7 Things That Made America Great." The 7 Things That Made America America. And there's a chapter in there, I think it's chapter 7, that deals with the media. And I'm not sure that it's a conspiracy. I think what you have here is a left-wing media that have these pundits that see the world through the same lens. And so what they are doing is they are promoting and projecting their own views of the world. And in terms of Ron Paul,